The morning wind was brittle, dust-laced and laced with the scent of cedar from the far-off ridges. In Dead River, a place forgotten by God but clung to by the desperate, the chapel bell never rang unless death or salvation knocked. That dawn, it was neither, but something stranger. Father Malachi opened the chapel door with hands still stiff from prayer, expecting emptiness. Instead, a bundle lay on the cold stone, swaddled in worn deer hide, tied with sinew. The baby's breath misted the air, soft and rhythmic, and from its neck hung a beaded charm, etched with the glyph of the Lakota. He dropped to his knees, not out of fear, out of something deeper. Reverence, maybe, or the feeling that fate had just crossed his path in flesh and bone. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," he whispered, "who left you here?" He scanned the horizon. Empty, no hoofprints, no smoke from distant camps, only the dry hiss of the wind threading through brittle grass and sun-split gravestones. Inside, he lit the altar candles and laid the baby atop the linen cloth. The child didn't cry. Its eyes were open, dark as molasses, watching him without fear. There was something ancient in that gaze, something that didn't belong in the arms of a newborn. Before we uncover why this baby would spark a war, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping frontier tales. By mid-morning, word had spread. The chapel wasn't just shelter anymore, it was scandal. Sheriff Lockwood came first, boots stomping hard, hand resting near his revolver. "How found what at your door?" Malachi met his gaze. "An infant, Lakota-born." "That ain't no infant," the sheriff growled. "It's a fuse. You light that, this whole valley goes up." Other voices followed. Mrs. Hartley from the bakery, her apron still powdered in flour. Benjamin Tate, the town's banker, always pale and sweating. They came in twos and threes, whispering, pointing, crossing themselves. "Return it to the plains," someone spat. "Let its kind take it back." But Malachi stood firm. "This child was left in the care of God, and I am his servant. I will not abandon it." That night he rocked the baby beside the altar as coyotes howled beyond the cottonwoods and stars blinked indifferent overhead. The chapel's walls seemed thinner, the silence between candle flickers louder. Somewhere beyond the hills a war drum may have sounded, or perhaps it was just the wind again. Still, he felt it, like something was coming, and it would not knock. The next morning, Dead River woke colder than usual, not from wind or weather, but from unease that settled into the bones of every soul in town. Fear moves faster than fact, and before noon, stories already painted the child in darker shades. Some claimed it was cursed, others said it was bait. At the saloon, old Zebediah muttered through yellow teeth, "Ain't no coincidence. First the cattle go missing. Now a redskin babe shows up at a holy doorstep, that's a sign." Signs were everywhere, if one looked hard enough. At the chapel, Malachi boiled oats for the infant, who now slept soundly in a wicker basket beneath the stained glass window of St. Joseph. The priest moved slowly, with purpose, his worn hands trembling only slightly as he cradled the bowl. He knew eyes watched him, some curious, most suspicious. He didn't flinch when the door creaked open behind him. Deputy Elias Crow stepped inside, tall, rigid, with sun-cracked skin and eyes as still as the barrel of a rifle. Unlike the sheriff, Elias didn't speak quick or loud. He just looked. "You know what you're doing?" he asked, voice low. Malachi met him with calm. "I know what I must do." Elias approached the basket, peered down at the infant. His expression didn't change. "I've seen children in war," he said. "They don't stay children for long." "Then let us raise one outside of war," Malachi replied. The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Elias shifted his weight, then nodded once before leaving. Outside, things grew stranger. Sam Drayton, the trapper, returned from the bluffs that evening with news that turned stomachs. He'd found footprints, dozens. Light, bare, fresh, no horses, just feet. And they circled the hills behind the chapel. Some said it was ghosts, others whispered it was scouts. Mrs. Hartley locked up her bakery. Tate loaded his rifle twice. Even the children stopped playing marbles and ran home before sunset. Malachi stayed with the baby. He read scripture aloud with a steady voice, but even he felt it, the pressure, the change. The air itself seemed tighter. Winds no longer sang through the valley. They whispered, and in those whispers came the names of things long buried and not meant to return. That night, the candles flickered more than usual, not from draught, but from the breath of something watching. Malachi placed the infant in his arms once again. "Who are you?" he murmured. "And why did they choose me?" The child only looked at him, quiet, content, unknowingly stirring an entire valley from slumber. In Dead River, no one slept soundly anymore, and in the hills, someone, or something, had begun to move. Beyond the ridges, where the wind moved slower and the sky touched earth in solemn silence, the Lakota had gathered. Chief Red Elk sat cross-legged beneath a dead cedar, his face carved deep by time and war. Around him, a circle of elders listened, their silence louder than drums. No one spoke until Red Elk opened his eyes. "He lives," the chief said. "My daughter's child breathes in the white man's church." The council stirred. One man spit into the dust. Another whispered prayers to the ancestors. Across from Red Elk, the youngest in the circle clenched his fists. His name was Kangi, known for fire in heart and blade. "They steal our children now," he growled. "First our land, then our buffalo, now this." But Red Elk raised a hand, and silence returned. "It was not theft," he said. "Wiaka left the child. She chose the cross." Kangi stood, fists trembling. "That is betrayal." "She is my blood," the chief replied, "and she bore prophecy." Far from the fire circle, in the shelter of stone, Wiaka sat alone. Her hair flowed unbound, dark as raven wings, her gaze distant. She had not wept, not once. An old woman approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You gave him to the white priest?" "I gave him to the spirits," Wiaka said. "He was born beneath the shadowed moon." The owl sang at his first breath. "He is more than ours." The old woman frowned. "You would trust a man of the book?" "I trust what I saw in his eyes. Mercy." Back at the council, the elders debated. Some urged war. Others demanded negotiation. Most feared what vengeance would bring. The chapel, they reminded, was built on ancient ground, once a place of Lakota mourning. Now it bore a foreign cross. Red Elk finally spoke. "If we ride with blood in our mouths, we invite the same upon our children. But if we wait, we may lose what cannot be reclaimed." "What will you do?" one asked. He looked toward the western sky, where smoke from Dead River curled faintly into the air. "I will send shadows first, eyes, then I will speak." "But speak with what?" Kangi barked. "Words or war?" Red Elk did not answer. Instead, he rose, walked to the fire, and dropped in a single eagle feather. The flames snapped. Wiaka watched from afar, her fingers resting over the hollow of her collarbone, where once she'd worn her son's charm. He was still out there. And she believed the man of God would not let harm reach him. But belief is fragile, and winds in the valley were shifting. The sun began its slow descent behind the jagged ridges, casting a molten hue across Dead River. The air carried a new scent, burnt sage and pine resin, unmistakable to those who had seen war. Smoke. Not from chimney stacks or cook fires, but from the distant bluffs to the west, curling upward in long, deliberate spirals. It was the kind of signal that told men more than words ever could. Warning, gathering, watching. Sheriff Lockwood spotted it first. He stood on the roof of the jailhouse, hat low, spyglass in hand, his jaw tensed. "Sound the bell." Within minutes, the church bell screamed across town. Not for worship, not for weddings. The sound of alarm rang hard and fast, and with it came the chaos. Men dropped tools, women gathered children, doors slammed, horses were tied tight. And the militia, just 12 men with rusted rifles and old coats, were roused from their homes and given orders to dig. Behind the chapel, a trench was started. Crates of ammunition once buried were unearthed. The schoolhouse became a lookout tower, and the saloon locked its liquor behind doors bolted with crossbeams. Inside the chapel, Malachi watched the flickering of stained glass light on the infant's face. He didn't tremble, but he felt the weight of what was unfolding. Deputy Elias entered quietly, brushing dirt from his hands. "They're setting up perimeter lines," he said. "You sure about this?" Malachi didn't look up. "What is the alternative?" Elias sighed. "You give them the child. We pray they go back." "And if they don't?" Malachi asked, finally turning. "If they come anyway, because we showed them we fear them more than we value life." The silence lingered. Outside, Mrs. Hartley crossed herself 3 times before entering with a satchel of cloths. "The boy," she said softly. "He needs a name." Malachi paused. "He already has one." He opened the tiny pouch tied to the child's neck and withdrew a strip of leather. Stitched into it with sinew were 3 simple lines and a curve. He traced them slowly. "I believe it says Ahote. It means restless one." Restless indeed. The child stirred in his sleep, as if dreaming of the distant bluffs and the songs of a people not far away. As the last light of day bled into purple, more smoke rose, this time in 3 plumes, triangles. Code known by every settler and scout. They were close, and they were many. Malachi stood by the chapel doors long after the others had fled indoors, watching the horizon where fire met sky. He clutched a small Bible in one hand, the child's swaddle in the other. No war had begun, but war was no longer a stranger, and it had already set foot in Dead River. The moon was a pale coin in the sky, veiled by drifting clouds. The chapel stood in stillness, yet Malachi's heart beat like hooves over dry ground. He sat by the altar, the infant asleep beside him, when a sound reached his ears, not loud, but deliberate. 3 soft knocks. He opened the door cautiously, and there she stood, Wiaka. Her braid fell over one shoulder, beads and feathers woven into the strands, face streaked with dirt and resolve. Her eyes met his, fierce and full. "I've come for my son." Malachi didn't step aside. "You're his mother." "I am." He glanced down at the child, then back at her. "Why leave him?" She stepped inside, voice steady. "Because if I had not, you would all be dead already." He blinked. "He was born under the shadow of the moon, the same hour the wind went still. The old ones called it a sign. They said he would be hunted by both sides, feared by both flames. I thought, maybe, here, among your walls, he'd be safe." Malachi studied her, listening not just to her words but the pain beneath them. "You trusted me." "I still do." He closed the door gently behind her. Inside the candlelight, Wiaka approached the sleeping child. Her hands trembled as she touched his cheek. "You named him?" she asked. "Ahote." She smiled faintly. "A good name. But names don't shield from bullets." Malachi sat. "What do you want from me?" "To protect him, as I cannot. My people prepare for war, not because of hate, but because they believe he was stolen. They don't know it was me who left him. If they did, they would shame me, or worse. Then tell them. I will, but I must do it from strength, not secrecy. They listen only when truth is carried by courage." He nodded slowly, eyes moving to the chapel's wooden cross above the altar. "This place is sacred to you as well, isn't it?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "Yes. Long before your God stood here, we burned sage on this ground, we wept here, we buried our bones beneath this floor." Malachi bowed his head. "Then it is still holy, for both of us." A distant howl echoed through the valley, too rhythmic to be wolf, too wild to be man. "They're close," she whispered. He rose. "Will they speak first?" "If I'm with you, they may." She gathered her son in her arms. The moment stretched, heavy and fragile. "You would die for him?" Malachi asked. Wiaka nodded. "I already did, the night I walked away." The chapel lights flickered, and the shadows outside deepened. By dawn, either a bridge would be built, or blood would be spilled. And the choice hung between them. As the final threads of daylight unraveled, the land held its breath. No wind stirred, no coyote cried. Even the crickets had gone silent. Dead River, cloaked in shadow, waited for something older than fear. And then they appeared. From every hill and hollow they emerged, silent riders on paint horses, their faces painted in solemn lines, feathers trailing from spears that caught the dying light. One by one, they surrounded the chapel until a perfect circle formed. 100 braves, no sound but hooves and heartbeats. Sheriff Lockwood watched from the schoolhouse rooftop, rifle resting on the ledge. His men crouched behind crates and barrels, eyes wide, fingers twitching. "They're not charging," one muttered. "They're waiting," Lockwood replied. Inside the chapel, Malachi stood beside the altar, Wiaka holding a hote in her arms. Candles flickered. The air was thick with breath and prayer. "They came," she said. He nodded. "They always would." Deputy Elias entered, sweat on his brow despite the cold. "They've surrounded us, but they're not moving." "They came for truth, not blood," Wiaka answered. Elias looked doubtful. "We won't survive a siege." "This is not a siege," Malachi said quietly. "It is a reckoning." Outside, the braves held formation. At their center, one rider dismounted and approached the chapel alone. Tall, draped in furs, his hair silvered by time, Red Elk. He carried no weapon, only a staff adorned with bones and feathers. From the bell tower, rifles trained on him. But he never flinched. Malachi stepped out to meet him. The two men stood face to face beneath the wooden cross. "I am Red Elk," the chief said. "You hold what belongs to my blood." Malachi's voice was calm. "He is here, safe, and his mother stands within these walls." Red Elk's eyes flickered, but his face remained stone. "You took him?" "No," Malachi said, voice firm. "She gave him." A pause. Then a sound like thunder. Braves pounding spears into the ground once unified. Red Elk raised a hand and silence returned. "I come not for revenge," he said, "but for restoration." "Then step inside," Malachi answered. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Red Elk walked forward, slow and deliberate, and passed through the chapel doors. Inside he saw Wiaka. She bowed her head. "Father," she said softly. "You shamed our blood," he answered. "I saved it." He looked at the boy, cradled against her chest, then to Malachi. "Will he be raised by men who forget the sky?" Malachi stepped forward. "Only by those who remember what is sacred." Outside, the braves held their line. Inside, a decision balanced on the breath of a child. And above them, the cross cast a long, flickering shadow across the floor, neither wholly theirs nor wholly his, but claimed still by something greater. The chapel doors remained open, light spilling out into the night, like a fragile thread of peace. Red Elk stood inside, flanked by silence. His gaze traveled across every wooden beam, every candle-lit shadow, until it returned to his daughter. "I named you after the morning," he said, "and yet you bring me dusk." Wiaka held the child tighter but stood firm. "I bring you a future." Outside, rifles clicked. In the sheriff's hands, the barrel of his gun rose inch by inch. From the rooftops and barricades, men whispered prayers not of mercy but of survival. Sheriff Lockwood stepped forward, voice like flint on steel. "This ain't a treaty house. You have 1 minute to leave our town, or I'll burn your horses and hang your feathers from the church bell." The threat hung heavy in the air. Red Elk turned to Malachi. "Is this the man who leads your people?" "No," Malachi said quietly. "He commands them. But he does not lead." Lockwood sneered. "Say that again, father." But Malachi did not respond. Instead, he stepped between the two, holding up both hands. "We are not enemies, not here, not tonight." Elias moved beside the sheriff, resting a hand on his arm. "Wait." "I said stand down, deputy." "Sir, just wait." Inside, Red Elk stepped closer to the altar. "Do you know what this place once was?" Malachi nodded. "A burial ground. A place of grief." "And now it's filled with light," the chief said. "Perhaps the bones still remember." He looked down at his grandson. "He will not be torn between two fires." "He mustn't be," Malachi agreed. Suddenly, Wiaka stepped forward, placing the baby into her father's arms. The room stilled. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Red Elk studied the child for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter. "Does he carry our name?" "He carries all names," she said. "That is why he must live." A flicker of something, regret, awe, passed over the chief's face. He handed the child back. "Then he will need both shields." He turned to Malachi. "The spirits in this place are awake. I feel them. You may speak to your God. I speak to mine. But tonight they are listening together." Malachi stepped toward the altar and opened his Bible. "Then let me speak the words of peace." He read not from wrath or vengeance, but from mercy. The candles glowed brighter, the air warm with breath and belief. For a moment even Lockwood held still. Outside the braves remained in place, but inside something shifted. Two enemies did not become allies, but perhaps they became less than strangers. And in the glow of that fragile understanding, Ahote stirred and blinked at the rafters, eyes wide, unafraid. By morning, the town was no longer holding its breath. It was suffocating in uncertainty. The braves remained silent and unmoving, their presence as steady as stone. Inside the chapel, the child slept, but the world around him teetered. Malachi stood before the townsfolk and warriors alike, voice carrying not with volume, but with weight. "We must decide," he said, "with honor or with ruin." The townspeople gathered in uneasy clumps. Sheriff Lockwood's lips were thin, arms crossed, refusing to meet Elias's eyes. Mrs. Hartley clutched her rosary. Benjamin Tate said nothing for once. Red Elk stepped forward. "We do not trust with ease, but we offer a way." Elias spoke then, his voice gruff. "Say it." "A trial," Red Elk answered. "Not of blood, but of spirit." Malachi looked between them. "What sort of trial?" "One man from each side," the chief said, "to walk through sacred flame." Whispers rose like ash. It was an ancient rite rarely seen, one that tested conviction, not strength. The fire would burn hot, the coals arranged by elders. But the trial wasn't about surviving unscathed. It was about walking without fear. "I'll do it," Elias said, before anyone else could speak. Lockwood scowled. "You've lost your damn mind." "No," Elias said. "I've seen enough war. I want to see something else." From the Lakota side, a man stepped forward. Kangi, proud and sharp-eyed. He removed his shirt, revealing scars that told stories no language could. The fire was built in the center of the chapel yard, between the old gravestones and the flower beds Wiaka once tended as a child. The coals were arranged in a line, glowing red with the breath of tradition. Elders murmured prayers in Lakota. Malachi offered a psalm in Latin, both languages bent toward hope. Elias stripped off his boots. So did Kangi. Neither looked at the other. This wasn't for rivalry. It was for reconciliation. At the signal, they walked, bare feet across burning coals. Smoke curled, flesh sizzled, but neither man cried out. Elias clenched his jaw. Kangi closed his eyes. Step by step they crossed, side by side, pain endured equally. When it was done, the crowd was silent. Not out of shock, but reverence. Malachi stepped forward. "They walked for us all. Let us not waste what they earned." Red Elk nodded. "Then the child will remain here, but under our gaze, with both paths open." Lockwood opened his mouth to object, but Wiaka's voice cut through the air. "This boy is not a weapon. He is a bridge, and bridges do not belong to one side." The people listened, because, for once, truth had bled through louder than pride, and as the fire cooled to ember, a decision settled, one not made by fear, but by shared flame. A day later, the fire pit had cooled, but its meaning lingered. The braves no longer circled the town. Their horses grazed in peace beyond the chapel, and for the first time in days, Dead River breathed without trembling. Inside the chapel, Red Elk placed a small bundle at the altar, an offering of herbs, bones, and river stones. "He will need both the book and the drum," he said, "and he must walk freely between." Malachi nodded. "He will." "I'll see to it." Wiaka stood beside him, her eyes softer now. "He will learn the Lakota tongue," she said. "He will know the names of stars and ancestors. And he'll read scripture," Malachi added, "not as command, but as wisdom." The agreement was simple and sacred. Ahote would be raised under a shared covenant. The chapel would remain a house of worship, but its doors would open to both peoples. The Lakota would visit freely, unarmed. The settlers would no longer dig trenches or whisper threats. More than peace had been born, a promise had been forged. The town, hesitant at first, began to adapt. Mrs. Hartley resumed baking, but now she left bread at the chapel for the braves. Benjamin Tate began to track the weather signs taught by a Lakota elder. The children, untouched by old hatred, began to play together beyond the cottonwoods, and the chapel changed too. The cross remained, but beside it hung a circle of eagle feathers, gifted by red elk. The altar cloth was embroidered with new symbols. On Sundays, Malachi preached with Weeyaka, sometimes translating. On sacred nights, the Lakota lit fires outside and sang their songs, which echoed into the rafters. It was not perfect. There were still glances, still murmurs, but no shots were fired. No more bells rang in alarm. They had chosen a different path. Even Elias changed. His limp worsened from the firewalk, but he never complained. He began carving small toys from cedar, leaving them in the chapel pews for Ahote. When asked why, he simply replied, "Because that boy carries more than most of us ever will." And Malachi, he no longer prayed for peace as a dream. He lived it daily, through every candle he lit and every child he taught. One evening, Weeyaka stood beside her son as he took his first steps across the chapel floor. "He walks like the wind," she said. "No," Malachi replied, "he walks like hope." Word spread beyond Dead River. Travelers arrived, curious. Some stayed, others carried the story with them, and the town slowly transformed, no longer a border outpost, but something new. They gave it a new name, Wakan Crossing, because it was no longer where one world ended, but where two worlds touched. Years passed, and with them the sharp edges of old wounds softened. Wakan Crossing thrived, not as a town of settlers or warriors, but as a place where both histories found breath under the same sky. Ahote grew beneath that sky. He ran along the chapel path where wildflowers bloomed without borders. He listened to Malachi recite the Beatitudes, then turned to hear Weeyaka sing the songs of the wind. He learned to carve from Elias and to track from Kangi. He knew the stories of Bethlehem and the stories of the Black Hills. Both found root in him. He did not belong to one world, he was the bridge. As a youth, he would climb the chapel's old bell tower, now adorned with ribbons of both cultures, and watch the sun set over the valley. "They said I'd bring war," he once told Malachi, "but I feel only calm." "Because you carry their hopes," Malachi replied, grey now, voice warm, "and they trust your steps." Red Elk, before his final winter, called Ahote to his lodge. "You are not my blood," he said. "You are my legacy, carry it wisely." Ahote nodded. "I will walk both paths." "You already do," the chief said, closing his eyes one last time. At the next moon gathering, Ahote led the ceremonial fire. At sunrise he read aloud from both traditions, scripture and story, blessing and memory. No one questioned it. It was not compromise, it was covenant. And so a legend took root, not of war or victory, but of the night 100 braves circled a chapel and chose not to burn it, of a priest who stood unarmed, a mother who gave everything, and a boy who grew between fire and faith. People came to hear the tale. They stood where smoke once curled and imagined what it took to choose peace when all roads led to blood. They asked about the child, and the old ones would smile and say, "He walked still." Ahote, now a man, stood where the chapel met the trees and watched children from both sides chase fireflies through the dusk. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The land spoke for him, and its voice said, "We remember, we choose. We begin again." If this story moved you, subscribe for more forgotten tales of the Old West. And don't miss the next chapter. Click on the video suggested on screen to continue your journey.